today Mike and I are going to talk to you guys a bit about workflows. And as I mentioned this morning in the intro, we definitely like to keep these sessions a bit collaborative, so if people have, if you've done certain things before and you want to, add to the conversation, give your own pointers and tips or anything else as we're going along, we like to keep this, very interactive and, yes, we did prepare a little bit of a script, but we're definitely open to people adding their own 2 cents and their own thoughts and opinions on some of it. So yeah, I think we're pretty ready to get started. Mike, do you want to kind of go over a little bit of what our scenario is that we're going to be working with?
So Nicole and I are both big fans of project accounting, probably just because it isn't used enough in contexts. But we've also had some fun on projects together with project accounting. So we thought that we would do a little bit of extension on that. One of the issues that we run into sometimes with project accounting is we like to track employee time and expenses and some payables bills as well. But we often want to close the project as it relates to people entering their time. We're done with the project and we want to create a gate or a barrier to make sure people don't continue to mistakenly post their time to that project. But we still want to receive in some lagging bills. We want to be able to record some bills that have come in, whether those be employee expenses or whether they just be bills from the payable side of things. And when we move our Nicole, if you have that little flow chart, the three statuses that we have in project accounting right now is in planning, and that's just the top section here. So our in planning status allows us to restrict any entries. We're still planning the project out. The next status of the project is active, which allows us then to receive in time entries, allows us to receive in invoices, and it allows us to receive in additional expenses. And then the next logical step, the next place that projects go is completed, which then restricts all entries. And so we have this complication where we want to restrict employees from posting, but we still want to receive in some of those lingering bills. So the new process that we want to work on is to create an additional status for the project, cleverly called closed. And the closed status will allow us to still receive in bills, but it'll restrict that time entry. We also want to print a report somewhere along the way only in this closed status, some type of invoice or pro forma invoice, so that we can deliver that, but not until the project is in the status called closed. So Nicole, sounds fun?
Yeah, definitely. So go ahead.
No, where do we start?
So one of the things that I started out with was thinking about, with doing something like this, you have that standard functionality within Acumatica. You can just go in, uncheck the time entries checkbox on the project screen, and that will restrict that project from being available in time entries. But as Mike mentioned, we want to have this additional status so we know that that's occurred, and that we can identify those without just someone manually checking the box, right? The other factor to this too, that I sort of considered was, when you close a project in standard Acumatica, or complete. When you complete in the standard process, it does populate the completed date on a project. So I wanted to have another field to capture that closed date in addition to the completed date. So the first thing that I did Just in the normal methodology, if you are used to adding fields in Acumatica user fields, I started out with a customization project in which I created a new field called close date. So nothing really fancy about this field. I just added a new field to that DAC in the screen, and it's a date field. But we will utilize that in the workflow as I go in and modify the workflow to have that date populated with the date that the action is triggered.
So you're following the way Acumatica does things in the completed state, where we're striking the date it was completed. You're marking the same concept, the date that this status occurred as well. Is that right?
Yep. And when I added this field, I just went into the screen, said add new field, published it. I just sort of cut that part out of the process because if anyone's familiar with publishing customization projects, sometimes it might slow our machine down and we're working under a time schedule. So I left this one pre-published, but nothing fancy about this. This is what I would call a low code, no code field. Just a straight up date field that I added to the project header.
There's a really nice article on acuCONNECT by my favorite acuCONNECT president on how to add user fields to the screen, so you can follow along from that article as well.
Thanks, Mike. So the other thing that I'm going to do in this, and I know I do this step a little bit differently than Mike or maybe even Chris and other people do. Let me first pull up the standard workflow so you can take a look at the workflow so we can kind of understand what's going on in the standard system. In this default workflow that's attached to the project screen, you have what's called, I think they call this the tree view. And then you can also switch to the diagram view. If I look at the diagram view, we looked at Mike's flow chart that he had of, here's our current process. Here's the process that we would like to get to. It's always important to me to start out with the workflows by looking at the standard workflow, because this is going to be all the options that are available regardless of the process that you're currently using, right? So when I look at the project screen, maybe I'm using projects, but I don't have approvals or anything else, but those are technically all part of the workflow. So it is good to kind of review that and make sure that you understand how your new actions and your new workflow modification is going to affect some of those other scenarios that could be happening. So I do like to review this. The other important thing, and you'll see me toggling back and forth through the diagram view and the tree view. If you look at the diagram view and you look at the identifier, that identifier is the identifier of the state, right? And if you look at the main part of the workflow, you can see the state identifier is that status field. So that's what's triggering the different actions. That status is what's, denoting all of these different states and statuses in this diagram. So these are all of our different states. I like to then go into the fields area to create my new state or status in this case. You can do that directly in the workflow, but I'm going to explain why I like to do this in the fields area. So to modify this status field and add a new status to our workflow, I did come in here, I hit the plus sign, go to project summary, and choose that status field. And that will add this into this fields area.
So that you
when
can
I go to my
then interact
so
with
that
it. So you're adding it to
values, correct. Now I like doing this in here because then I can see all of the existing values, so I can pick a new value that's not already used. When you add a state in the workflows, you don't get a look up there, and you kind of have to make sure you already know in your mind what all those values are when you're creating it. So I like to come in here and add it here, because then I can see which values and descriptions haven't already been used. So I added this new status of X as closed, and that's going to be, we're going to add that into our workflow to create this new process that Mike is asking for. Okay. So I did start out Yeah, that's fine. I didn't make any changes. And again, if anyone has any questions or comments, feel free to. My status values always be a letter.
I've never tried using numbers. Have you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe so. I personally, I just like to kind of keep the same convention.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I try to keep things similar as to, you know, how Acumatica is defining them, because it just makes it easier when you're going forward. But I would assume that you could still use like a number. So is there a built-in limitation with 26 possible values, or could we use
You
2
could
letters?
probably
It
use
would.
£! And exclamation point, but it is only a single character.
It would depend on the field, and you know, in the case of projects, I believe that status field is only 1 character. So is it
It's the same
possible
in
to
sales
expand
order.
those things? And I mean, really anything's possible, though. You could expand the field.
Some of these
Yeah,
low-code fields we'd want to leave
that's a
alone.
good point. That's a good point, Arlene. Single character. Thanks, Chris. So on this project that I started here, on this new workflow that I've started, I haven't really modified anything in here yet. To create a new workflow, I like to start out with inheriting the base workflow, so I can take all that in. There's other options as far as how you add workflows. In this case, I'm extending a system workflow. I have no other changes in here at this point. So I'm going to go into the diagram view. And because I've already modified that field, I'm going to click on the 3 dots here, and I'm going to say add predefined state. Now, going back to what I mentioned, yes, correct, because I already defined it in the fields. If I had not already defined that, I could say add state and create a new state that would update that as well. So I'm going to go into add predefined state, and you'll see here that here's my new state that I added in the fields area. So it's closed, and we're going to get a new box here in blue. And now we have to think about, and maybe I have to go back and check my my flow chart here, right? So what did we say we wanted to do here? So
we want to transition from active to closed.
I need to transition from active to closed. So I'm going to click on this little line up here and say add transition. My computer's thinking. Okay, try it again. Add transition. Here we go. And this is going to be triggered by an action. So we can actually create a new action, which, again, this is kind of the nice thing that's great about these new workflows is, you know, these are things that, you know, maybe you could do in the past with automation steps or would take code. But we're just going to create a simple action. And I'm going to say create, and I'm going to call this close. And I can also set like the category and whether or not I want to add it to the toolbar as well. So I'm just going to put this in the actions category and also say add to toolbar. So it's outside of the little 3-dot menu. And then we have to choose our target state. So if I'm going from active and I'm triggering that close action, I want my target state to be closed. Okay, so now you can see that that arrow moves there.
And then the part I always forget, which is to then where do we go from closed? So we're going to transition from closed to complete.
And in this case, because we already have a complete action, I don't have to create a new one. I'm going to use the existing complete project to bring it into the completed status from closed. Now, obviously, we're definitely oversimplifying this. There's a ton of other things that you might want to do or you might want to say that might need to go along with this workflow. Like let's say it's in closed, but then you want to also go to a suspended status, or what if it's in closed and you want to cancel it? There could be a lot of different scenarios. I do think it's really important as you're working with workflows, while they might be easy, it's really important to kind of think about all the directions you might want to go with a new status or state.
Even okay. Just going back to active in this case, right?
Even going back to active, right? So this again is so oversimplified, you know, because once you get into that closed status, you really only have one option in this scenario. But you know, for time's sake, we're just keeping it simple. Okay.
So now then the clever part. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, so now, the clever part is now that we close the project, we want to do some updates.
Right. So when I'm moving from active to closed, I can also utilize this fields to update after transition. So I'm going to hit the plus sign here. And as I mentioned before, you know, one of the ways to restrict those time entries is by unchecking the time entries checkbox on the project screen. So I'm going to choose that field, the time entries field, and I'm going to select this from schema value and set the new value as unchecked. Okay, so whenever I trigger this close action, it's going to uncheck that time entries checkbox on the project. The other thing that I want to do, like I mentioned earlier, is populate that close date. So I'm going to choose my close date field, and I'm going to also select from schema here. And then here, I'm just going to select my at today, right? So when I trigger that action, it's going to uncheck the time entries checkbox and populate the close date with today's date of whenever it's being triggered, right? And is there anything else that we want to do with that workflow?
So what we want to do next is we want to we created the report already. That's already done. So if we go to the actions, we'll see that the report is available. But what we want to do is we can go ahead and open that up. We want to only print this report if we're in that new state. And so we have some conditions there, disabled and hidden, that we want to use to say only when we're in the state of closed would we print that report. And so we're going to create a condition, and I'm okay with double negatives. For those of you who aren't, this gets a little complicated. By the way, this was probably the biggest fight Nicole and I had when we were setting this up, is how do we do the double negative? Because
do we make it equals, or do we make it not equals?
So we're going to go to conditions here. We're going to create a new condition, and it's going to be called not closed. Because what we want to do is we want to hide this report if the status is not closed. Okay. So these conditions are incredibly powerful. They can really allow a lot of behavior changes within the action screen. And so now when we go back to that report, we can now disable that report and also hide it, so we can't see it when it is not closed.
Right. So two different options there. You probably wouldn't necessarily do both at the same time, but disabled, you'll still see it on the menu. You just won't be able to select it. Hidden, it's hidden completely. So either option, depending on how you want it to display. Okay. Adding reports is really simple. I know we didn't really walk through it, but once that report was already added to the sitemap, you're just creating a new action called run report, selecting that report. You can also do things like the window mode. You can say if you want same tab, new tab, pop-up window, people have different preferences there as far as that's concerned. And then you have your navigation parameters too, right? So with a custom report, you would be populating the report parameters with fields from the object that you're running the action from. Yes, Arlene, you can use that condition multiple times. And you can also use standard conditions as well. So if you saw there was some that were already in there, you can utilize those in your current workflow. There's additional things that you can do with the conditions too, where you can pick a system condition and append a system condition. So lots of different options as to how you utilize the conditions. Okay. So that is going to put those. Oh, we're going to publish now.
Yeah. By the way, for those of you who watched Arlene yesterday, I thought she did a spectacular job.
Oh, it really was. I watched it also, Arlene. It was really excellent.
And you did something that I haven't seen done, but I liked it, which is you had it all pre-recorded, so you didn't have this scary moment that Nicole and I have right now, which is putting back together what we took apart. I liked the way you did that. I think I'm going to steal that idea.
Yeah, Mike and I, we were practicing this beforehand, and we built it all. Then we were like, okay, let's trim some of it out, and then we were trimming out incorrect. Like we trimmed things out in the incorrect manner the first time. We had to run through it a few times. So fingers crossed we didn't muck up our customization project too much.
We'll see who had better notes. Your notes were a bit scattered. Mine just were unreadable. That's a different story. But I like this conditions concept. It's a really good, powerful concept that they just recently added, and they continue to extend. This is what makes the low code, no code so powerful. Is ideas like being able to apply a condition to something. So now when we go to a project.
Yeah, let's go take a look at what we have going on here. Chris Joko is probably like, why did you do this on your local? It'd be so much faster.
So we'll take a project that's active. So we have that button at the top that says close. And that came from creating the status. And when we click on close, what we'll see is the status will change from active to close. I'm sorry, you have to first complete.
No, I did exactly what I said I was going to forget to do. And I forget this every single time. You know what it is?
Yep, it's what I do. You didn't click on the box to make that active.
I did not make my new workflow active. Okay. So things that you add in the actions, if it doesn't have anything to do with the, I did this all on purpose because I wanted to show you a tip for what you might miss. So I needed to make this active, and that will make my new workflow active. I forget that every time.
Steve, if it's Nicole, it would be a 2-hour session. If it was Mike and Steve, it would be a 4-hour session. We got 4 minutes. Hopefully my publishing finishes, and it's nice to see you here, Steve. Glad you're joining us. It depends on what's for lunch. So one of the things that we didn't do that we probably would have if this was something that we would do live is what we did is we just unchecked the box to allow for time entries. What we may have done if we wanted to make this be more robust is we could have made that field disabled within the workflow actions itself. So you can see when Nicole hit close, it turned off time entries, so it's not available anymore, and it also changed the status of the project to be complete. If you scooch up a little bit, we can see that. Or closed, excuse me. That's closed. And then when we click on the three dots,
well, we have our print pro forma
we now have our print pro forma available.
And the other thing that we did within this too, just to kind of give you an example of something else that you could do as well, is we created a very simple create sales order button as well. This really doesn't have any logic or anything else to it, just kind of another example of something that you could do at a very simple level with workflows, is create a link to another screen, much like you saw with the example that we did of the report, where you could click on that button and it should launch the sales order screen if my machine wants to cooperate. It would launch the sales order screen and just populate it with something like a customer number to allow someone to start entering a sales order associated with that. I didn't take this too much farther. You could obviously do things like populate it with the project number, maybe something else. You will find limitations within the workflows too. There's so much that you can do with them, but there is, you will hit certain hiccups where you go, no, I just can't access that field, or I can't pull this information in which case you would find yourself needing to do something like write code. But there's, I think these are kind of good examples of some very simple but powerful options that you have with the workflows and things that you can do to really tailor the system to, what someone's process is.
So quick recap, I think the important concepts are creating a new status. That status can be tracked within the system, so we can manage it in our lists. We can identify that's a different status for the for tracking purposes. Having some behavior changes in terms of being able to see certain elements based on that status. Attaching reports and additional actions like spawning out an order, and also then some transitions, being able to move from one status to the next, so we can create some flow, workflow intended. We had a lot of fun doing this, and I hope that I gave you guys some ideas for what you guys can do. We're going to stick around for a couple of minutes and answer questions if you have them. I know that we have another session for others to go to, but if you guys want to hop on, you also can share your screen and your audio if you want to ask questions. Thank you all for attending, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
I told Chris to take a day off, but he didn't.
I'm not off yet. I still got it. It's not even 9 yet here, or it's 9:15.
I know. I'm just teasing you.
Nicole, why don't we open up the conditions and we can do that again?
Yeah. So on the condition here, Arlene, and again, Arlene, if you want to share, you might not want to share your video if you weren't prepared, but if you want to share your audio, you can share your audio as well, I believe. But you have all the fields available. I think mainly all of these fields are going to be what I would call header level fields. It's going to start to get a little bit difficult if you try to do conditions, I think, at the detail level. But really, you're just creating the condition here, and then when we go to the actions, I'm getting feedback from something. When we go to actions in here, and again, I could go to standard actions or actions that I've created. You can come in here and say,
why don't you go to that action of creating the sales order?
Yeah, so I could disable this if this is not closed. You can use it in any single action. So even, conditions menu, is that always just under the screen ID, or you had to add that?
No,
Oh,
that's
I mean,
standard.
it's either available in the screen or it's not. I will say that with the workflows, there are a few areas where they haven't fully utilized the new workflow functionality. Yeah, it's still fairly new. And I have run into a few screens. I think like AP bills, I think we found, right, Chris? I don't know if Chris is still on audio, but I think AP bills or something couldn't do all the workflow stuff. There's a few screens you might run into where you can't.
They started with CRM and just kind of expanded to the distribution side. Projects is pretty new with the with this more robust workflow as well. So it is getting built out in different workspaces.
Yeah. And it's really nice too, because even if you don't want to modify a workflow, I have one client that I work with who they just wanted to disable a particular action on certain types of sales orders, or, you don't necessarily have to go in and utilize the workflow stuff to go into an existing action and put a condition on it. So that it's really useful, especially, the other things like that would be difficult with, security or anything else. So it's nice to be able to kind of go in here and just disable it if it meets a certain condition criteria.
Yeah, I've added it mostly with order types. So allow this behavior, disable this behavior with a specific order
Yeah,
type.
that's just one other quick thing to mention too. That's kind of useful, is that with the workflows, we used projects in this example because there's only one workflow, which is the default workflow. But on things like sales orders, there are multiple workflows for the various different order types. So depending on the screen, depending on the process, it might be a little bit different. We tried to stick with a kind of easy scenario to make it clean for everybody to look at. Okay. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. I think Sean said we had a client who wanted to send an email to the customer as soon as goods were merchant. We did that with work. So it was automated again. Cool.
That's a grand idea.
Yeah.
I think that's some of the best things about acuCONNECT is all these different use cases kind of get us all thinking about other things.
So that makes me think of one other thing though too, since Arlene's still on and she did her session on the business events. The other thing, like relating to something like this, is you could use an action to update a checkbox on, let's say, a project or a sales order, and then have the business event be reading that checkbox to trigger an email.
We were actually playing around with triggering a text.
We were playing around with that. We were thinking about doing that with either an email or a text message, but you could use the action to just check the box, then the business event to read that, and either a GI or whatever else to have it move along.
There's actually an article on the community forum about that, which would be a good starting place for that. But yeah, that was that's a concept that if we had had more time, we would probably extended that out.
Yeah. Yeah.
We could have backed Arlene.
Yeah. Well, maybe next year we'll just do like a double session and get Arlene to do the business events for us, because I always have a hard time with this.
Well, she could record it all, and we could just do our Mystery Science 3000 narration.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is that Mystery Science Theater? I think that's what it is. Steve could tell me if I'm right. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Arlene, and thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. I think we're going to close it out now and head over to V Technologies, I think is going on, and check out their session. Again, thank you to my buddy Mike. Always a pleasure.
Enjoy the rest of the conference. Cheers, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.